Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. Including the national championship, we have just 12 bowl games left in this 2018 postseason. And half of those games will be played today on New Year's Eve, and we're going to kick things off with the Military Bowl between Cincinnati and Virginia Tech. We'll start over here with the Bearcats, and you have to give a lot of credit for what Luke Fickell has done transforming the Cincinnati program. Just last year, they were 4-8, and in 1 year, it's transformed them from 4-8 to 10-2. And I did not expect a lot out of Cincinnati in the American Athletic this year. I expected them to have another down year with Luke Fickell, probably put him on the hot seat, but a great coaching job that he has done here, and they are going for their first bowl win since 2012 against Virginia Tech and the Hokies. And we'll talk about them in a second, but we're going to continue talking about Cincinnati with their only 2 losses coming to Temple and, of course, the undefeated Central Florida Knights who will be facing off in the Fiesta Bowl on New Year's Day against LSU. Their offense has seen a major uptick in production. They're scoring 34.9 points per game, and teams in the American Athletic aren't normally known for having a defense, but Cincinnati has had one of the better defenses in the conference, allowing just 16.1 points per game on average this season. And that's really going to be a big test here for going up against a Virginia Tech offense that scores 29.8, but it's good for Cincinnati's offense because Virginia Tech's defense is allowing 30.7 points per game on the season. That's something that is very uncharacteristic of a Bud Foster defense over with the Hokies. That's really going to benefit Cincinnati and their star quarterback, Desmond Ridder, who is just a freshman, won American Athletic Conference Rookie of the Year, has thrown for over 2,300 yards and 19 touchdowns on the year to just 5 interceptions. They have a very, very balanced offense overall for Cincinnati. As we mentioned, Desmond Ridder, dual threat quarterback for Cincinnati. They also have Michael Warren II with over 1,100 yards on the ground and 17 touchdowns. He's just a sophomore, so Luke Fickell has built a very solid offense here. Ridder and Warren both should be around going into next season, and Cincinnati could be a legitimate threat in the American Athletic come 2019. And we're talking about Virginia Tech and how uncharacteristic this defense is under Bud Foster, allowing over 30 points per game on the year. They had very high expectations going into this year. And every year, I'm not very high on Virginia Tech. I mean, yes, they have proven me wrong many a times, but this was one of those years that they didn't. I think I had them around 7-5, 8-4, and they finished 6-6 and probably shouldn't even be going to their 26th straight bowl game. That bowl streak should have ended this year had it not been for some late game heroics against Virginia. And, of course, getting that makeup game against Marshall in the season finale. So they're very lucky to be going bowling right now. They were number 12 in the nation at one point before losing to Old Dominion. That was really the beginning of the end for them. They had a 4-game losing streak sprinkled in there. This has not been one of Virginia Tech's most memorable years. Their quarterback, Ryan Willis, we all know, came in for Josh Jackson, who got hurt early on in the year. He's played fairly well, throwing for over 2,400 yards and 22 touchdowns. But for this game, hopefully Bud Foster gets his guys to wake up because defense is going to be the key, shutting down this very dynamic Cincinnati offense. I don't think they're going to be enough to get the job done here. I think Cincinnati clinches an 11-win season and sends Virginia Tech home with their first losing season since 1992. The Hokies would be 6-7 on the year with a loss here in the Military Bowl. Moving on to the Sun Bowl between Stanford and Pittsburgh, a bowl game that Stanford has been fairly familiar with over the past couple of years. I think played this game just 2 years ago against North Carolina. Maybe it was 3 years ago. But nonetheless, going up against this Pittsburgh Panthers squad who somehow won their division, the ACC, before getting annihilated against Clemson, the ACC championship game. Stanford will be playing without Bryce Love, but that's really not going to be an issue. Of course, Bryce Love going to be sitting out. He has been battling some injuries and, of course, preparing for the NFL draft, but he was not performing this season the way that many of us expected him to perform, not at the Heisman level caliber play as he did last year. Just 739 yards and 6 touchdowns on the season. It's been a fairly disappointing year for Stanford. They were number 7 in the country at one point before losing 4 of their next 5 games after being ranked in the top 10. So a very disappointing year for them. Pittsburgh's allowing 217.3 passing yards per game and is allowing 28.8 points per game. Why is that important? Because as we mentioned, Bryce Love will not be playing, so really Stanford, and for the most of the year, Stanford has been relying on the pass game. And they have a very underrated quarterback, in my opinion, in KJ Costello, and one of the better wide receivers in the Pac-12, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, 969 yards and 14 touchdowns receiving for Arcega-Whiteside in the year. That's going to be the key for Stanford in this game. Going up against a Pittsburgh defense that's been fairly generous against the pass. Stanford wants to win the Sun Bowl and clinch a 9-win season. They're going to have to rely on winning that game through the air. Pittsburgh is going to be the exact opposite. Stanford's got to win this game through the air. Pittsburgh, if they want to win, they're going to win on the ground. They have Quadri Olison, who has rushed for 1,100 yards over the year, and Darren Hall, who's rushed for over 1,000 yards on the year as well. So that's the first time in Pittsburgh history that they've ever had 2 1,000-yard rushers in the same season. So Stanford's defense is really going to have to buckle down. They only allow 140.9 rushing yards per game. So will they be able to continue that success against two very talented Pittsburgh running backs? I think they do get the job done down in Texas in the Sun Bowl and clinch a 9-win season, sending Pittsburgh home with, I believe, a 500 record, 7-7 overall. Moving on to the Red Box Bowl, one of the newer bowls. We're always adding new bowl games here. Kind of gets annoying after a little bit. We saw how well the Cheez-It Bowl worked out. Will the Red Box Bowl be similar? And I do not think it will be. I think it will be quite the opposite. But Michigan State, we'll start with them. A very disappointing year for them. If you go back and watch some of my videos from the summer and even way early on in the preseason, March and April, I had very high expectations for the Spartans and Mark D'Antonio. They were one of the most experienced teams in the Big Ten. Over 19 returning starters coming back. They had a solid running back in L.J. Scott, Brian Lewerke at quarterback, who we thought was going to perform better. And they just did not get the job done, just going 7-5. They started the year at number 11 in the nation and just tanked after that. In my opinion, they've been very inconsistent. They beat Penn State on the road, but then somehow lost to Nebraska and barely beat Rutgers in the season finale. They barely beat Utah State in that season opener before losing to Arizona State in week 2. So a very inconsistent Michigan State team. Which team is going to show up here against Oregon? Michigan State will be without their star cornerback and Justin Lane, so that is something for that's a bit of a concern for a defense that's been fairly solid, allowing just 18 points per game. The problem is their offense, only scoring 19.8 points per game on the year. If they want to win this game, their defense is going to have to step up and keep this game low scoring, because if this gets into a high scoring shootout, Michigan State's not going to be able to keep up and things could get ugly. Going over for Oregon, they have Justin Herbert at quarterback, and he just announced that he will be returning for his senior year with the Ducks. And so next year in the Pac-12, Oregon could be a very major threat. A very solid recruiting class coming in, one of the better quarterbacks in the entire nation coming back in Justin Herbert. And so they're hoping to build some momentum in this Red Box Bowl and carry that in to 2019. Like Michigan State, had a very gracious opportunity, good opportunity to make a great year out of all the talent they had coming back. They blew that lead against Stanford, as we mentioned before. That was when Stanford was number 7. Oregon should have won that game. They did beat Washington when Washington was number 7 in the nation, but then they were blown out by Arizona by 29. They lost to Washington State, who obviously has done phenomenal this year, winning 11 games, winning that Alamo Bowl over Iowa State, but has been a little inconsistent at times. But in the end, they're going to be more consistent in this game. They're scoring 37.2 points per game. Michigan State's only allowing 18. Something's going to give, and I'm giving the edge to this Oregon offense led by Justin Herbert, who was thrown for 28 touchdowns and nearly 3,000 yards on the year. Great quarterback play. The hype surrounding this Oregon team is going to get the job done in the Red Box Bowl against a struggling Michigan State team. Moving on to the Liberty Bowl. We're halfway through these bowl games on New Year's Eve. Number 23, Missouri, taking on Oklahoma State in a former Big 12 matchup. Former Big 12 rivals going up against this game. And this one has the makes for a shootout. If you like offense, this is going to be the game for you. Missouri is averaging 36.9 points per game, while Oklahoma State is averaging 38.4 points per game. You have two very solid quarterbacks going at it, with Missouri's Drew Lock over 3,100 yards and 25 touchdowns on the year, and you've got Taylor Cornelius over 3,600 yards on the year and 28 touchdowns. So both very phenomenal quarterbacks going at it. If you like kind of like the air raid offense, not that these two teams run that, but if you want to see a lot of passing, if you want to see a lot of points, you need to tune into the Liberty Bowl. We'll keep talking a little bit about Missouri here. They had a chance to have a very, very special year. I think that they won 8 games. But they lost to South Carolina by 2 and Kentucky by 1 in controversial fashion. So they win both of those. They're looking at a 10-win season and maybe could be playing in a New Year's Six Bowl or at least one of those upper-level bowl games. They just couldn't get the job done there. Their defense, everybody complains or talks about how well Missouri's offense is, but no one gives credit to the defense, which in the SEC is only allowing 24.4 points per game, which is not too bad. But will that continue against this very high-octane Oklahoma State offense? And as we mentioned, they do have a very solid quarterback in Taylor Cornelius, but like Michigan State, has been fairly inconsistent. They beat Boise State early on in the year. They beat Texas. They beat West Virginia, but somehow lost to TCU, lost to Kansas State by 19, and lost to Texas Tech, who failed to make a bowl game by 24. They also barely lost to Oklahoma by just 1 point, going for 2 to win that game and failing on that 2-point conversion. So which team is going to show up for Oklahoma State in this Liberty Bowl against Missouri? Which team is going to show up to try to clinch a winning season, since Oklahoma State is at 6-6? Their defense allows 32.4 points per game. I just don't have enough faith in Oklahoma State's defense to get the job done. Picking them to spread, Missouri is favored by 8.5. I would lean towards Oklahoma State in that one, but I do think in the end the Tigers get the win due to their experience from Drew Lock and obviously a much better defense than the Cowboys. Moving down to the Holiday Bowl, number 22 Northwestern, number 17 Utah. A very solid ranked versus ranked matchup here, and two teams that lost in their conference championship game. And you got to look at this Northwestern team and think what could have been for them. They obviously turned things around, somehow won their division in the Big Ten West, and made the Big Ten championship game before ultimately losing to Ohio State. But had they beaten Akron in non-conference play, had they beaten Michigan, a game where they blew a 17-0 lead over the Wolverines, just imagine what could have been for Northwestern, where they would be right now. We're not talking playoff by any means, but certainly a much better bowl game than the Holiday Bowl, which is nothing to frown about. Problem with Northwestern is they're losing some big defensive starters for this game. They're going to be without linebacker Nate Hall. They're going to be without their defensive tackle in Jordan Thompson. However, they're still going to be led by Joe Gaziano with 11.5 tackles for loss. He's the leader of this Northwestern defense. Will they be able to get the job done against another fairly solid defense in Utah? This is going to be, unlike the Liberty Bowl, a very low-scoring game, in my opinion. A very defensive-battled game between two of the better defenses, I think, in the nation with Northwestern and Utah. Utah, on the other hand, has battled some injuries over the course of the year, nearly beat Washington in the Pac-12 championship game. That game, 10-3 in favor of the Huskies, giving the Huskies a berth in the Rose Bowl to face off against Ohio State, who beat Northwestern in the Big Ten championship game. Who will be the quarterback for the Utes? Many believe that Tyler Huntley was done for the year, but now there's speculation that he could be back for this Holiday Bowl. And as a matter of fact, he's been practicing in bowl practices. So will it be Tyler Huntley or will it be Jason Shelley? If Huntley is healthy enough, he will be the one to be playing. If not, Shelley will be, who has been the starter for the past 4 games when Huntley went down with an injury against Arizona State. And he hasn't played bad. I will give him credit. He's gotten enough for Utah to get the wins and make the Pac-12 championship game. But a lot of that relies on their defense as well, which just allows 18.5 points per game. So I think in the end, Utah's defense is going to be the one that owns the edge over Northwestern and a fairly inconsistent quarterback in Clayton Thorson, who has thrown for over 2,900 yards but has 14 interceptions on the year to just 15 touchdowns. So a very turnover-prone quarterback in Northwestern is going to benefit Utah in this Holiday Bowl. I think they get a win here over the Wildcats. And it's also worth mentioning that under Kyle Whittingham at Utah, Utah is 11-1. Kyle Whittingham is 11-1 in bowl games with the Utes. I think he improves up to 12-1. They know how to play in the postseason. I think that success continues out in California for the Holiday Bowl. Then the final game of the night on New Year's Eve, North Carolina State, number 19, Texas A&M in the Gator Bowl. Once again, an opportunity to see a potential high-scoring game. Nothing compared to Texas A&M season finale against LSU. Not going to be that high-scoring, not going to that many overtimes, but still has a chance to see quite a bit of offense. North Carolina State averages 35.6 points per game, finished the year 9-3, and I'll give them credit because that's not where I thought, and I did not expect North Carolina State to play that well this season, especially with the amount of starters they've lost, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Think of what could have been for North Carolina State. 9-3, they lost to Wake Forest, a game they shouldn't have lost. That's a 10-win season there. Their only 2 losses were to Syracuse and Clemson, both very solid teams. Clemson now playing for the national championship against Alabama, Syracuse winning their bowl game and clinching a 10-win season over West Virginia. We all know the leader of this Wolfpack offense is going to be Ryan Finley, who chose to play in this game. Many people choosing to sit out their bowl games. Finley deciding to play in this game, and I give him a lot of credit for that. For a quarterback that we know is going to go into the NFL, he's choosing to be there for his team and show up and try to get the Wolfpack a 10-win season on the year. The problem is, 2 other main playmakers, one on offense and one on defense, will be skipping out of this game. We've got Kelvin Harmon, the leading wide receiver for North Carolina State, over 1,100 yards receiving on the year. He will be sitting out of this bowl game, and their leading tackler in Jermaine Pratt will be skipping this game. So that's 2 major losses for this Wolfpack team going up against a very solid Texas A&M team from the SEC. And as we mentioned, we talked about Ryan Finley over with North Carolina State. We've got Texas A&M's Kellen Mond over here, who's been phenomenal under Jimbo Fisher. Obviously, Fisher's trying to build something here with the Aggies, make them competitors in the SEC, make them national title competitors once again. Mond throwing for over 2,900 yards and 23 touchdowns, and has the ability to move in the pocket, has the ability to scramble a little bit. So he's not one of your ideal dual threat quarterbacks, but he can make some plays work with his legs if he has to. But the main X factor in this game will be Travion Williams, the running back for Texas A&M. Over 1,500 yards on the ground this season. He's averaging 175 rushing yards per game. He's going up against a North Carolina State defense that allows just 109.1 rushing yards per game. So something's going to give there. When North Carolina State's defense shut down Travion Williams, forced Texas A&M to win this game through the air, or will Travion continue to average 175 rushing yards per game or more in this Gator Bowl and lead the Aggies to victory? I think that will be the key here for Texas A&M to remain balanced on offense. I think overall they're going to be too fast, too physical, and win this game in what should be a fairly close one. I'm excited to see the offenses go at it, but I think Jimbo Fisher, obviously having experience against North Carolina State during his time at Florida State, gets the job done against a very talented NC State team, sending them home with a 9-4 record, and Texas A&M finishing with about 9. So I'm very excited to see how this game turns out on New Year's Eve. That game wrapping up probably around 9 o'clock, 9:30, just a couple hours away from the ball dropping in New York to kick off 2019. So we hope you all have a very happy New Year. Spend your time watching some football, being with your friends and with your family, and get ready for 11 straight bowl games over the course of New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. And as always, go check us out on Twitter for spread picks for every single one of these games and all the remaining 12 bowl games left in this postseason. And as always, please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time on the Gridiron Expert.